With some moral theories, rather than others, it's easier to find a fundamental principle of morality, a criteria of morality. With others, it's somewhat harder. Mill actually makes it very easy for us. That is, he summarizes it for us right at the beginning of his chapter of his book, Utilitarianism. What is utilitarianism? And he summarizes it by saying that, and we see this right over here, actions are right in proportion as they tend to promote happiness, wrong in proportion as they tend to produce the reverse of happiness. By happiness is intended pleasure in the absence of pain. By unhappiness, pain and the privation of pleasure. Now, we should note a couple things, or rather than even noting so far, why don't you guys stop this recording for a second and see, because there are a few things in here that are kind of strange about the way Mill is stating this fundamental principle of morality, the principle of utility, or as he calls it, the greatest happiness principle, because some of the language in it is particularly peculiar. And let me give you a hint. Look at it in terms of what he's saying for regarding rightness and wrongness. So do me a favor, stop the recording, take a look and see if there are things that seem a little bit strange to you in this statement. And then once you have done that, let's say write it down in your notebook, then come back and start it up again, and I'll continue. Now, there are two things that I find very odd about this principle. And the first one is, if you read it, actions are right in proportion as they tend to promote happiness. Wrong in proportion. Well, what's the proportion all about? Does that mean certain actions are partially right and partially wrong? Let's take some egregious cases of really things that are absolutely morally wrong. Pedophilia, murder, is pedophilia, raping a child. Now, is that about 80% wrong and 20% right? Or is it's just wrong simpliciter? That is just wrong, period. It's not partially right, partially wrong. So that's hard really to understand. Or murder. Well, murder is, about 87% wrong, 20. Or even take actions that we think are the right thing to do. Obligatory actions, or actions that are really morally worthy. Giving a large sum of money to charity, that it was really goes beyond what maybe a little bit of what you could easily afford. That would be a good thing. Is that 80% right, or is that 90% right? No, when we look at all these things, we tend to think that there aren't degrees of rightness or wrongness, so that actions are right in proportion sounds a little bit strange. Now, the other strange thing about the language that Mill uses is he talks about tending to promote or tending to produce happiness, or the reverse of it, produce pain and the absence of pleasure, pleasure and the absence of pain. When we're thinking about actions that are right, which are what we think are right or wrong, they don't tend to produce anything. They actually do produce pain and pleasure. So the question is, what are we talking about tending to produce? So it makes understanding the theory, a little bit more difficult, and we have to think about it a little bit. I'm going to suggest what I think Mill is talking about, and I think it goes along with what Mill has to say. And when we talk about there's a third thing that I didn't point out in this slide, but it's probably worth notice. When we say, by happiness is intended pleasure and the absence of pain, especially when we're talking about actions producing or tending to produce or promote. How do they tend to promote the absence of pain? Kind of a strange thing, but there is an interpretation, I think, that will explain all of this language, and we'll turn to that next.